A colossal stone face stares out from the jungle, silent for millennia. These are the Olmec heads, and they are one of history's most captivating puzzles. By the end of this, you will understand not just how these giant portraits were made, but the profound story of the civilization that dared to create them. We will uncover why a sophisticated culture invested generations of labor into carving these giants, only to deliberately bury them. We will also explore the controversial theories about their origins that have sparked debate for over a century. What does it take for an entire society to vanish, leaving only stone faces as its legacy? Their story begins in a world of water and earth. This was the Olmec heartland, a vast region of tropical lowlands along the Gulf Coast of Mexico. Imagine sweltering heat, tangled mangrove swamps, and rivers that flooded seasonally, creating a landscape both incredibly fertile and incredibly challenging. It was here, in places with names like San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes, that this civilization took root. For over 1,000 years, from roughly 1500 to 400 before the Common Era, the Olmecs not only survived in this environment, they mastered it. They drained swamps to create raised fields for agriculture, they traded for resources across vast distances, and they built complex ceremonial centers with pyramids and plazas. This is why scholars call them the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Every major civilization that followed in the region, from the Maya to the Aztec, inherited foundational ideas from the Olmecs. Concepts of kingship, sacred ballgames, complex calendars, and a distinct artistic style all trace their earliest known origins to these people of the swamps. They laid the intellectual and spiritual groundwork for everything that came after. So when we look at those giant stone heads, we are not just looking at isolated sculptures. We are looking at the signature monuments of the very first great civilization in the Americas. The sheer scale of this civilization's ambition becomes undeniable when you stand before one of their heads. The first of these giants to be officially documented by the outside world was unearthed in a field near Tres Zapotes in 1862. A local farmer, simply clearing his land, struck stone. What he uncovered was not a simple rock, but the top of a massive human head. Word spread and eventually reached Jose Melgar, a scholar who visited the site. His published account is a record of pure astonishment. He described a sculpture of immense size, carved from a single block of solid basalt, with features he found startlingly unfamiliar. Here was a face, he wrote, with broad lips and a flat, wide nose, utterly unlike the indigenous people of the region. This was the spark. For the first time, the modern world was confronted with a physical artifact from a lost American civilization that was both grand and profoundly mysterious. The initial reaction from scholars in Europe and America was a mixture of awe and complete bafflement. How could such sophisticated art exist in the jungles of Mexico, a place they had assumed was populated only by so-called primitive tribes before the arrival of the Spanish? The heads did not fit any known historical narrative. This confusion led to a flood of speculative, often outlandish theories. Some suggested these were relics of a lost tribe of Israel, or perhaps evidence of ancient Phoenician sailors who had crossed the Atlantic. The most persistent and controversial idea, fueled by those distinct facial features, was that they represented visitors from Africa, proof of ancient transoceanic contact long before Columbus. The heads became a blank screen onto which every preconceived notion about human history was projected, because the world had no context for them. The Olmecs themselves had not yet been named, their cities still buried under centuries of soil and vegetation. All that existed were these silent, stoic faces, seeming to gaze from a past that nobody could explain. These silent giants hold their secrets in stone, and to understand them, we must start with the undeniable physical facts. Each head is a staggering feat of ancient engineering. They are not carved from just any stone, but from a single immense block of basalt, a volcanic rock known for its incredible hardness and density. Imagine a boulder so heavy it would take dozens of modern trucks to move it. The largest of these heads weighs around 40 tons, which is roughly the same as 10 full-grown elephants, and they stand over 9 feet tall, towering above any person who approaches. The material itself tells a story of immense effort, because the nearest source for this specific basalt is in the Tuxtlas Mountains, a rugged volcanic range dozens of miles away from the ceremonial centers where the heads were finally placed. This means the Olmecs, without wheels or draft animals, had to transport these multi-ton blocks through dense jungle, across rivers, and over uneven terrain. The journey alone would have been a monumental undertaking, requiring the coordinated labor of hundreds, if not thousands, of people over many months. But the journey was just the beginning. Once the stone arrived, master sculptors began their work, transforming a rough boulder into a human likeness with nothing but stone tools. And here we see a remarkable consistency in their artistic vision. Every single head shares a distinct, uniform style. Each figure wears what appears to be a close-fitting protective helmet, often adorned with distinctive insignia or decorations. The faces are fleshy and full, with broad noses, thick lips, and pronounced cheekbones. The mouths are almost always shown with a slight, enigmatic downturn, giving them an expression of solemn authority or deep contemplation. Their eyes are almond-shaped, often gazing forward with an intense, watchful focus. This is not generic art. Scholars have confirmed the discovery of 17 of these colossal heads, and a close study reveals that no two are exactly alike. The shape of the head, the details on the helmet, the set of the jaw, all show subtle variations. This strongly suggests that these are not depictions of gods or mythical beings, but individual portraits of powerful, real-life Olmec rulers. Each head is a unique monument to a specific leader, immortalized in the most durable material their civilization could find. So when you look at one, you are not just seeing a sculpture, you are meeting a person, a king whose name is lost to time, but whose face has endured for millennia. The portrait of a king is only the final stage of a journey that began in volcanic fire. That journey starts in the Tuxtlas Mountains, a chain of ancient volcanoes rising from the coastal plain. This is the only source for the specific, fine-grained basalt used for the colossal heads. The distance is staggering. From the quarries to the great city of San Lorenzo, for example, the stone had to travel over 150 kilometers, or nearly 100 miles, through some of the most challenging terrain in the Americas. There were no wheels, no metal tools, and no beasts of burden like oxen or horses in this part of the ancient world. Every ounce of progress was achieved through human ingenuity and muscle. So how did they do it? The most widely accepted theory paints a picture of brilliant logistical planning. The first leg of the journey likely involved moving the raw, multi-ton boulders down from the mountainsides using a combination of rope, leverage, and carefully constructed earthen ramps. From there, the Olmecs would have needed to get the stones to the rivers that snaked through the lowlands toward their cities. This is where their intimate knowledge of the environment became their greatest tool. Scholars believe they may have constructed massive rafts or barges, floating the immense blocks downstream during the rainy season when water levels were high. This method would have dramatically reduced the friction and physical strain of moving such weight. Once they neared their destination, the final overland trek would have begun. Here, the likely technology was the roller and sled. Workers would have laid down a track of smoothed logs, placed the stone block on a wooden sled, and then, through a coordinated effort of hundreds pulling with ropes, dragged the sled forward. As the sled moved, teams behind would rush to pick up the rollers it had passed over and place them back in front, creating a continuous, moving road. It was a slow, grueling, and dangerous process, a symphony of shouted commands and straining bodies that could take many months to complete, but the transportation was only half the battle. Once the stone arrived at the ceremonial plaza, the true artistry began. Using only tools made of harder stones like jadate or obsidian, master sculptors would have begun to rough out the shape. They would have pounded the basalt with hammerstones to chip away large flakes, gradually revealing the form within the rock. Then, with painstaking precision, they would have used abrasive sands and water with reeds or cords to grind and polish the surface, smoothing the cheeks, defining the lips, and carving the intricate details of the helmets. This was not a rushed job. It was a sacred act of creation, likely performed by specialized artisans who passed their knowledge down through generations. The result of this unimaginable effort was more than a statue. It was a permanent, immovable declaration of power. A ruler could say, "Look at this face," and know that every person in the kingdom had a hand in bringing it here. The head itself was proof of his ability to command the labor of thousands, to orchestrate the very landscape to his will. The mystery of how they moved the stone is, in the end, the answer to why they made them at all. That solemn expression carved in stone was meant to communicate something vital. If these are portraits of kings, as the leading theory suggests, then each unique face is a political statement. The variations in helmet design are particularly telling. One head from San Lorenzo wears a simple cap with a knotted band, while another from Venta sports an elaborate headdress with a distinct paw wing symbol. These are not random decorations. In later Mesoamerican cultures, such insignia denoted specific titles, lineages, or military achievements. The Olmecs may have been establishing this visual language of power first. The individualized facial features, the subtle differences in the set of the jaw or the shape of the eyes, all point toward commemorating real individuals. This theory transforms the heads from mysterious artifacts into historical documents. They become a royal gallery, a dynasty of rulers who commanded enough loyalty and labor to have their likenesses immortalized in 40-ton stone. It is a powerful and logical explanation, but it is not the only one. Some scholars look at those distinctive helmets and see something else entirely, the protective gear of a ball player. The Olmecs are credited with inventing the Mesoamerican ballgame, a ritual sport with profound religious significance. Players wore padded belts and helmets to protect themselves from the heavy rubber ball. Could the heads depict deified star athletes or legendary founders of the game? The helmet argument is compelling, but critics point out that the facial features are too individualized for generic athletes. These faces feel personal. Another alternative is that they represent a specific god, perhaps a rain or earth deity, with each head being a variation on the divine theme. Yet, if they are gods, why bury them so carefully? Gods are typically enshrined and worshipped across generations, not interred. The act of burial feels more like a respectful retirement of a human leader's monument. Each theory has its merits, but the portrait hypothesis aligns most closely with the evidence, the effort involved, and the practices of later Mesoamerican cultures who definitely erected statues of their rulers. The heads stand as silent sentinels of a complex society that understood the power of an image, the need to make authority permanent, and the desire to be remembered. Yet this focus on individual likeness invites a deeper, more controversial question. What if these faces are not just portraits of local rulers, but evidence of a much longer journey? For over a century, one of the most persistent and heated debates surrounding the Olmec heads has been the so-called African connection. Proponents of this theory point directly to the sculpture's physical features, the broad noses, the full lips, and the overall facial structure, arguing they bear a striking resemblance to people of African descent. They suggest these are not stylized representations, but accurate depictions of actual visitors or even rulers from across the Atlantic Ocean, proof of pre-Columbian contact between Africa and the Americas. This idea is powerful because it seems to offer a simple, visual answer. Look at the face, they say, and the origin is obvious. some have pointed to specific cultural parallels, like the use of certain symbols that resemble Egyptian hieroglyphs or the practice of pyramid building, weaving a narrative of ancient seafaring civilizations planting their seeds in the New World. Mainstream archaeology, however, examines this claim with a very different set of tools, and the evidence simply does not support it. The first point of contention is the artistic style itself. Isolating facial features and comparing them across vast distances and millennia is a risky practice. The Olmec artistic canon was highly stylized. They intentionally sculpted figures, both in colossal heads and in smaller jade carvings, with these fleshy, baby-like features, a style scholars sometimes call were jaguar. It was a conscious aesthetic choice, a symbolic representation of power, and perhaps a connection to the sacred jaguar, not a photographic record of ethnicity. If you look at later Mesoamerican art from the Maya to the Aztec, you see a continuation of this tradition of representing nobility with idealized, often similar features, which are clearly native to the region. The heads fit perfectly within this local artistic evolution. More critically, the African contact theory lacks any corroborating evidence beyond superficial visual comparison. Archaeology is built on layers of proof. If there had been sustained contact or migration from Africa to the Olmec heartland around 1500 before the Common Era, we would expect to find a trace of that interaction in the material record. We would find African plants like specific grains in the ancient soil. We would find African animal remains. We would find distinctively African pottery styles, tools, or burial practices mixed with Olmec ones. Most importantly, we would find genetic evidence in the skeletal remains of the Olmec people themselves. To date, not a single shred of this corroborating evidence has been found. Every archaeological dig at Olmec sites reveals a culture that developed in place, using local materials, worshipping local gods like the jaguar and the feathered serpent, and eating local crops like maize. The stone for the heads came from the Tuxtlas Mountains, not across an ocean. The entire technological and social system needed to create them, from the quarrying to the transportation to the carving, is distinctly, uniquely Mesoamerican. The theory, while captivating, ultimately imposes an external explanation on a civilization whose achievements are magnificent enough to stand on their own. The Olmecs do not need to be explained by outsiders. Their story is written in the swamps and the stones of their own homeland. The helmets are not just decorative. They are a key to unlocking the identity of these stone giants. Every single colossal head wears one, a close-fitting cap that covers the skull, often secured with a strap under the chin. But look closer, and the uniformity breaks down into fascinating detail. Some are smooth and simple, like a basic protective cap. Others are intricately carved with patterns, knots, and most intriguingly, distinct symbols. One famous head from Venta, for instance, wears a helmet adorned with a repeated design that looks like a stylized animal paw with feathers, an emblem scholars call the paw wing motif. This is not random decoration. In later Mesoamerican cultures, such specific insignia functioned like heraldry, denoting a person's family lineage, their city-state, or a great victory in battle. The variation in these helmets strongly suggests they are markers of individual identity, like a personalized crown for each ruler. This supports the portrait theory powerfully. A king would not share the exact same royal headdress as his predecessor. His symbol of office would be unique to him, but the helmet's practical purpose is another compelling avenue. The Olmecs are widely credited with inventing the Mesoamerican ballgame, a ritual sport that was far more than just a game. It was a cosmic drama reenacting myths of creation and the struggle between light and darkness. Players wore substantial protective gear because the game was brutal. They used a solid rubber ball, sometimes weighing as much as 8 or 9 pounds, and they could not use their hands or feet. They had to strike the ball with their hips, knees, and elbows. Surviving artifacts from later periods show players wearing thick padded belts, knee guards, and crucially, heavy helmets often made of wood or leather. Some of these ancient depictions show helmets that bear a striking resemblance to the simple, rounded caps seen on the Olmec heads. Could the colossal heads then represent deified ball players? It is a tantalizing idea. The game was so central to cosmology that a legendary founder or a champion who won a mythic match could be worthy of such a monument. Yet, the argument against this is the sheer individuality of the faces. While the helmet might be standard gear, the portrait beneath it is unmistakably a specific person, not a generic athlete. Perhaps the truth merges both ideas. In Olmec society, the roles of ruler, priest, and perhaps even star ball player were not separate. The king may have been the ritual embodiment of the hero in the cosmic game. His helmet, then, would be both his protective sporting equipment and his crown, a symbol that he was the central player in the sacred drama that maintained the world's order. The helmet tells us that Olmec society was highly structured, with a clear hierarchy led by individuals whose authority was wrapped up in both political power and spiritual duty. To command the labor for these monuments, a ruler had to be more than a strong leader. He had to be a figure who connected his people to the gods, and his helmet, whether of the ball court or the throne, was the visible sign of that sacred contract. The political drama of these stone rulers did not end with their creation. To see the next chapter, we must travel to San Lorenzo, the oldest and grandest of the Olmec capitals. Perched on a massive artificial plateau overlooking the Coatzacoalcos River basin, San Lorenzo was the beating heart of early Olmec power for centuries. It was here, in the 1940s, that archaeologist Matthew Stirling made a series of electrifying discoveries. He unearthed not one, but 10 of the colossal heads, more than at any other site. But the condition of these giants told a violent story. Many were found not standing proudly in plazas, but deliberately buried in long, orderly rows. Some had been carefully laid to rest in specially dug pits, while others showed clear signs of mutilation. Their faces were gouged, their features smashed, their noses broken off. This was not random vandalism or the slow decay of time. This was a systematic, intentional act. The monuments had been ritually defaced and then hidden beneath the earth. Why would a civilization go to such unimaginable effort to create these symbols of power, only to later destroy and bury them? The leading theory points to a profound political and spiritual upheaval. In the world of ancient Mesoamerica, monuments were not just art. They were living embodiments of the rulers they depicted, vessels for their spiritual essence and political authority. When a dynasty fell, when a new faction seized power, or when a city was abandoned, the old order had to be erased completely. The ritual killing of a stone portrait was a way to symbolically destroy the previous ruler's power, to break their connection to the living world and the gods. It was a necessary act to make way for a new regime. Imagine the scene. Perhaps during a rebellion or a conquest, the people of San Lorenzo toppled these 40-ton symbols of the old kings. They might have chiseled away the noses and mouths to silence them, smashed the eyes to blind their gaze, and then, in a final act of respect or perhaps fear, given them a formal burial to contain their lingering spirit. The heads were retired but not discarded. Their burial suggests a complex relationship with the past, a mix of rejection and reverence. The decapitated giants of San Lorenzo are a stark archaeological lesson. They show us that the Olmec world was not a static, peaceful kingdom, but a dynamic landscape of rising and falling cities, of contested power and dramatic change. The silent faces held power, and that power was dangerous enough that it had to be broken before a new story could begin. The story of power then shifted east to a city rising from a swamp. While San Lorenzo fell into decline, the Olmec heartland found a new center at Venta. This was not a city of residences, but a grand ceremonial complex, an island of sacred order carved from the wetlands. Here, the colossal heads were arranged with a purpose that went beyond individual commemoration. 4 of these giants were found at Venta, and unlike the buried and mutilated heads of San Lorenzo, these were discovered positioned in lines or groups, facing outward as if standing guard. Their placement was deliberate, part of a vast and intricate architectural plan. The entire site of Venta is a masterpiece of cosmic engineering. Its central axis is aligned precisely 8 degrees west of true north, an orientation not found at San Lorenzo and one that seems to track important celestial events. The city's main feature is a colossal earthen pyramid, one of the earliest in Mesoamerica, shaped not with straight sides but as a fluted cone, perhaps mimicking a sacred mountain or a volcano. Arranged along that sacred north-south axis were plazas, platforms, and mounds, creating a ritual pathway, and placed within this layout, like powerful chess pieces, were the stone monuments, including the heads. They were not isolated statues, they were integrated components. Scholars studying the site believe the heads, with their watchful gaze, may have served as eternal guardians of this sacred space, perhaps representing ancestral kings protecting the ceremonial core. Their alignment could also have marked solstice sunrises or the passing of important stars, tying the authority of the rulers they depicted directly to the cycles of the cosmos. At Venta, the portrait of the king becomes part of a larger sentence written in earth and stone, a sentence that says human power is only valid when it mirrors the order of the heavens. But the story of the colossal heads does not end with the fall of Venta. To see the true legacy of the Olmecs, we must travel to a place called Tres Zapotes. This site represents a later chapter, a time when the great ceremonial centers of the heartland were fading, but Olmec ideas were spreading and evolving. It was here, in the late 1930s, that archaeologist Matthew Stirling made another discovery that would forever change our understanding of this civilization. While excavating, his team uncovered something astonishing. It was not a colossal head, but a different kind of monument, a massive stone slab now known as Stela C. One side was carved with the stylized face of a jaguar, a classic Olmec motif, but the other side held a revelation. Carved into the stone was a series of dots and bars and a glyph that looked like a profile of a head. To the untrained eye, it might seem like simple decoration, but to scholars it was a seismic event. Those dots and bars formed a date. They represented the number 7 using the Mesoamerican Videsimal or base 20 counting system. And that head glyph was an early form of the day sign for earthquake, part of the 260-day sacred calendar. This was not just art, this was writing. Stela C bears one of the earliest known examples of the long count calendar, the same complex linear system for tracking vast stretches of time that the Maya would later perfect and use on their own stelae. The date on this stone corresponds to the year 32 before the Common Era in our calendar. This single artifact forged a direct intellectual link. It proved that the Olmecs were not just master sculptors and engineers. They were also profound intellectuals, the likely inventors of the core concepts of Mesoamerican timekeeping and written expression. The colossal heads show us their power and artistry, but Stela C shows us their mind. It reveals a civilization deeply concerned with recording time, with anchoring human events within a grand cosmic cycle. This transforms the Olmec legacy. They gave their successors more than an artistic style. They provided the very tools for history, a calendar to mark the days and a writing system to tell the stories. The silent stone faces now have a voice, and it speaks in the language of mathematics and celestial observation. The stone itself can tell us where it began its journey. For decades, pinpointing the exact origin of the basalt used for the colossal heads relied on educated guesses and visual comparison. But modern archaeology has a far more precise tool at its disposal, the science of geochemical fingerprinting. Techniques like X-ray fluorescence and neutron activation analysis allow scientists to do something remarkable. They can take a small, harmless sample from a sculpture and analyze its unique elemental signature. Every volcanic flow, every quarry, has a distinct chemical recipe, a blend of trace elements like strontium, neodymium, and barium that acts like a geological barcode. Researchers have meticulously sampled the basalt from heads at San Lorenzo, La Venta, and other sites, and then compared those signatures to samples taken from known quarries across the Tuxtlas Mountains. The results are definitive. They create a map of stone and effort. The analysis shows that the heads at San Lorenzo were carved from basalt sourced from Cerro Sintepec, a specific volcano in the Tuxtlas located over 150 kilometers away. The heads at La Venta, meanwhile, used stone from a different set of flows, perhaps because political or trade relationships had shifted over time. This scientific evidence does more than just confirm the general region. It often identifies the single mountain or even the specific outcrop where the Olmecs chose to extract their royal portrait stone. This precision utterly dismantles any theory of distant oceanic origins for the material. The basalt did not come from across the Atlantic. It came from the very mountains the Olmecs could see on the horizon. The geochemical fingerprint is a silent but irrefutable witness to the scale of their enterprise. It confirms that the logistical nightmare of moving a 40-ton block was not a one-time stunt, but a repeatable, managed operation. They identified the best stone, organized expeditions to the source, and mastered the routes back home, not once, but for every single colossal head we have ever found. Science, in this case, does not diminish the mystery. It deepens our awe for the practical, determined genius of the people who did it. Colossal Head 1 from San Lorenzo embodies a quiet, unshakable command. Known simply as the King, this is the most famous of all the Olmec heads, and for good reason. His face is remarkably well preserved, allowing us to see the sculptor's intent with stunning clarity. He does not glare or smile. His expression is one of profound, serene authority. The broad nose, the full lips set in a gentle downturn, and the heavy-lidded eyes all project a sense of weary wisdom and immense dignity. He looks less like a warrior and more like a venerable judge, a ruler whose power is so absolute it requires no visible aggression. The helmet he wears is a simple, rounded cap secured by a wide strap that runs under his chin. Its very simplicity focuses all attention on the face itself, on the person rather than the office. This is a portrait designed to inspire loyalty and respect, a leader who seems to hold the weight of the world with calm assurance. In stark contrast, just a few hundred yards away at the same site, San Lorenzo Head 5 presents a completely different kind of ruler. Where the king is serene, Head 5 is fierce. This sculpture is unique among all the discovered heads for one startling feature: a snarling, open mouth that reveals 2 rows of perfectly carved teeth. The expression is one of raw, vocal power. The eyes are wide and intense, the brow is furrowed, and the entire visage seems caught in a moment of command or perhaps ritual roar. The helmet here is more elaborate, with deep grooves and a prominent front knot. This head does not invite calm reflection, it demands attention. It may depict a wartime leader, a shout, a king in the midst of a sacred performance. The dramatic difference between these 2 portraits from the same city is the clearest evidence we have that these were individual people. A society making generic god statues would not create such polar opposite expressions. They are capturing personality, moment, and mood in 40 tons of stone. The artistry reaches another level of refinement at La Venta, seen in the exquisite detail of Head 8. While slightly smaller than the San Lorenzo giants, this head is a masterpiece of precise carving. The round, full face is impeccably smooth, and the helmet is a work of intricate symbolism. It is decorated with a repeated, woven mat design, a pattern that in later Mesoamerican cultures was the ultimate symbol of political authority. To sit upon a woven mat was to hold the throne. The strap under the chin is carved with such care it looks like real cloth, and atop the helmet sits a distinct three-pointed crest. Every line is crisp, every curve deliberate. This is not a rough monument, it is a polished heirloom. The expression, while still solemn, is less heavy than the king's, perhaps depicting a younger ruler at the height of his power, his authority literally woven into the very helmet he wears. Together, these three faces tell a story of a civilization with a deep and sophisticated portrait tradition. They show us a spectrum of leadership, from contemplative wisdom to fierce command to refined, symbolic authority. The Olmec sculptors were not just technicians moving stone, they were keen observers of human nature. They captured the set of a jaw, the tension in a brow, the subtle pride in a posture. When you look from the serene king to the snarling head, five to the meticulously adorned ruler from Venta, you are not seeing a mystery, you are reading a gallery of history. Each face is a chapter, a name lost to time, but a presence that has stubbornly, silently endured. The colossal heads are merely the most visible peaks of a vast cultural mountain. To understand the Olmecs, we must look beyond those famous faces and into the heart of their ceremonial world. At Venta, the great earthen pyramid rises not with sharp angles, but in the shape of a fluted cone, a man-made sacred mountain dominating the swampy island. This was not just a platform for rituals, it was a symbolic portal, likely representing the volcano that brought both destructive fire and the precious basalt for their sculptures. Scattered around such plazas are other monumental stoneworks that are equally mysterious. There are massive rectangular blocks known as altars, though their function is debated. Some, like Altar 4 at Venta, are carved with intricate scenes in deep relief, showing a ruler emerging from a niche, perhaps a cave, holding a rope that binds captured prisoners. These are not simple tables for offerings, they are political proclamations in stone, depicting the power of life and death held by the elite. Other huge stones were carved into throne-like seats, literal seats of power where a ruler might be presented to the people, physically connecting him to the enduring earth. But the Olmecs expressed their deepest beliefs on a far more intimate scale as well, through the mesmerizing beauty of jade. This vibrant green stone, harder than steel, was more precious to them than gold. They sourced it through vast trade networks stretching into modern-day Guatemala, and their artisans transformed it into objects of profound spiritual power. They carved delicate celts or axe heads that were never meant to cut wood, but served as ritual offerings, often buried in dedicated caches as gifts to the earth. They created stunning mosaic masks that may have adorned wooden statues of gods or ancestors, and they produced small, intricate figurines with that distinctive Olmec aesthetic, featuring pudgy, baby-like bodies and downturned mouth. This brings us to one of their most enduring and enigmatic symbols, the word jaguar. This is not a literal monster, but a supernatural blend, a human infant with the snarling features of a jaguar, often shown with a cleft head, almond-shaped eyes, and a furrowed brow. The jaguar was the ultimate symbol of raw power in the Mesoamerican world, the ruler of the night and the underworld. By fusing its essence with a human child, the Olmecs may have been expressing a belief in a divine lineage, where their rulers possessed the transformative, fearsome power of the jungle's greatest predator. You see this motif everywhere, from tiny jade pendants to the colossal stone heads themselves, whose fleshy, snarling features sometimes echo that same supernatural blend. So the heads were never an isolated phenomenon. They were the public, monumental expression of a belief system that also flowed into towering pyramids, political altars, and exquisite personal jade. They are the grandest chapter in a much longer, richer story written in earth, stone, and sacred green rock. The true depth of a civilization is often measured by its words. For decades, the Olmecs were seen as a pre-literate culture, a people of profound art and architecture who had not yet crossed the threshold into true writing. Their story was told in stone and jade, but not, it seemed, in script. This perception began to crumble in the late 1990s when construction workers digging a road in the state of Veracruz unearthed a strange rectangular slab. This was the Cascajal block, a fist-sized piece of serpentine stone weighing about 26 pounds. Its surface was not smooth but covered with 62 carefully incised symbols arranged in clear horizontal rows. To the archaeologists who first studied it, the arrangement was electrifying. The symbols were not a random collection of pictures. They were grouped in sequences with clear repetitions of certain signs, suggesting they formed a syntactic order, the hallmark of true writing, where symbols represent sounds or words to convey specific language. The block was dated to around 900 before the Common Era, centuries older than any other known writing in the Americas. The symbols themselves are fascinating. Some are abstract, like comb-like shapes or circles with dots. Others are recognizable: an insect, a throne, a maize cob, an ear of corn. One even looks strikingly like the later Maya glyph for king. The Cascajal block was a thunderclap in the archaeological world. It presented the staggering possibility that the Olmecs were not just the mother culture of art and religion, but also the inventors of the very idea of writing in this part of the world. Yet, because the block was not found in a controlled archaeological dig and is a unique artifact, some scholars urge caution, debating whether it represents a full writing system or an advanced precursor. But the Cascajal block is not alone. Other, quieter pieces of evidence have emerged from the mud. At the Olmec site of San Andres, just a few miles from Venta, researchers found a cylindrical ceramic seal and fragments of a greenstone plaque. The seal, when rolled on wet clay, would leave an impression, and the impression it leaves is not a simple decorative pattern. It features two distinct signs, one that looks like a fish or a shark, and another that resembles a comb. These are not pictures for art's sake. They are standardized symbols used with a stamp, suggesting they could mark ownership, denote a title, or even sign a document. The greenstone plaque fragments bore similar intentional incisions. These artifacts, found in a secure archaeological layer dating to around 650 before the Common Era, provide a crucial context the Cascajal block lacked. They show that the use of symbolic notation was not a one-time experiment, but a practice integrated into Olmec society. This evidence, though fragmentary and still debated, paints a compelling new portrait. It suggests the Olmecs were on the cusp of, or had already achieved, a system for recording language. They were moving beyond depicting kings in stone to possibly recording their names, their deeds, or their divine prayers in a portable, reproducible form. The implications are profound. If they had writing, what stories have been lost? What treaties, what histories, what poems were written on now vanished bark, paper, or cloth? The colossal heads show us their faces, but these faint scratches on stone and ceramic hint at their voices. The mystery of the Olmecs deepens, not because we lack evidence of their sophistication, but because every new discovery reveals just how much of their intellectual world has slipped through the cracks of time. The silence that eventually fell over the great centers was not an ending, but a transformation. By around 400 years before the Common Era, the grand plazas of San Lorenzo and Venta were abandoned. The colossal heads were left to the jungle, and the hum of organized human activity faded from these places. So what happened to the people who built an entire civilization? The Olmecs did not simply vanish into thin air. Their decline was likely a slow, complex unraveling caused by a perfect storm of environmental and social pressures. One of the most compelling theories points to the very landscape they had mastered. Their agricultural success depended on the rich, seasonal floods of the rivers, which deposited life-giving silt onto their fields. But over centuries, that same process may have turned against them. Intensive farming and deforestation, necessary to feed growing populations, could have led to severe erosion upstream. The rivers, choked with excess silt, might have changed their courses or flooded unpredictably, drowning fields instead of fertilizing them. A stable food supply is the foundation of any complex society, and its disruption can trigger catastrophic collapse. At the same time, geological evidence suggests another possible culprit. The Tuxtlas Mountains, the source of their sacred basalt, are a chain of active volcanoes. A major eruption during this period would have been a disaster of biblical proportions. It would have blanketed the farmlands in a layer of sterile ash, poisoned water sources, and made the air unbreathable for years. Imagine the sky darkening for months, crops failing, and the very concept of order crumbling under a rain of fire from the gods. Such an event could have shattered the spiritual authority of the rulers, who were meant to maintain harmony with nature. Beyond environmental catastrophe, internal strife may have played a role. The sheer effort required to build their monuments speaks of a highly centralized, top-down society. The labor drafts, the management of resources, the demands of the elite, all of this could have bred resentment among the common people. If a series of weak rulers failed to deliver prosperity or divine favor, that social contract could have fractured. Revolts, the sacking of ceremonial centers, and the deliberate defacement of royal monuments like the heads at San Lorenzo all point to periods of intense internal conflict. Finally, the economic engine may have simply stalled. The Olmec's influence was built on control of trade routes for precious materials like jade and obsidian. As new centers of power emerged elsewhere in Mesoamerica, like the rising Zapotec culture in the valley of Oaxaca, these trade networks may have shifted, bypassing the old Olmec heartland and draining its wealth and political relevance. It was likely a combination of all these factors, a cascade of failures that made the old way of life unsustainable. But here is the crucial point: the people themselves did not disappear. They migrated, they integrated with neighboring groups, and they carried their knowledge with them. The Olmec civilization as a centralized political force dissolved, but its cultural DNA proved unbreakable. Their ideas about sacred kingship, the ballgame, the feathered serpent deity, their artistic styles, and their calendrical systems did not die. They were seeds scattered to the wind, taking root in the fertile minds of the Maya, the Zapotecs, the people of Teotihuacan, and later the Aztecs. The colossal heads were left behind, but the soul of the Olmec world journeyed on, becoming the bedrock of Mesoamerican civilization for the next 2,000 years. The jungle, however, was not done giving up its secrets. For centuries after the Olmecs departed, their stone sentinels slumbered beneath layers of earth and roots, known only to the local communities who lived among the strange, half-buried faces. The modern rediscovery of these giants began not with a grand expedition, but with a farmer's plow. In 1862, that discovery at Tres Zapotes ignited a century of speculation, but very little actual digging. The heads were treated as isolated curiosities, puzzles without a context. It would take a new generation of archaeologists, armed with shovels and a systematic approach, to finally see the heads not as orphans of history, but as part of a lost civilization. The man who would change everything was Matthew Stirling. In the late 1930s and throughout the 1940s, funded by the National Geographic Society and the Smithsonian Institution, Stirling led a series of groundbreaking expeditions into the Mexican heartland. He was not content to just document the known heads. He went looking for their home. At Tres Zapotes, his team unearthed the game-changing Stellar Sea with its early calendar date. But his most dramatic work was at San Lorenzo. There, through meticulous excavation, he and his team pulled 10 colossal heads from the earth, revealing for the first time that these monuments existed in groups, that they came from a major urban center, and that they had been deliberately mutilated and buried. Stirling's work, widely publicized in magazines and newsreels, did more than just find artifacts. It defined the Olmecs as a real, complex society. He gave the civilization its name, taken from the Aztec word for the region's inhabitants, and he provided the first coherent framework for their history. His excavations shifted the conversation from wild speculation about foreign origins to grounded study of a native Mesoamerican culture. The era of the Olmecs as a scientific discipline had truly begun. Today, the tools of discovery have evolved far beyond shovels and brushes, yet the goal remains the same: to see the unseen. Modern archaeologists are now mapping the Olmec world without ever breaking the soil. Technologies like LiDAR, which uses laser pulses shot from an aircraft to penetrate the dense forest canopy, have revolutionized our understanding. From the air, LiDAR strips away the vegetation to reveal the ghostly footprints of ancient civilization etched into the earth. It has shown that sites like San Lorenzo were far larger and more complex than previously imagined, with extensive residential areas, elaborate drainage systems, and hidden structures that have never been excavated. Similarly, ground-penetrating radar can peer several meters into the soil, detecting buried walls, plazas, and even potential offering caches. These tools allow researchers to create detailed, three-dimensional maps of entire cities, understanding their layout and planning before a single test pit is dug. This non-invasive approach is crucial as it helps protect fragile sites and guides excavations with incredible precision. It means the next great discovery might not start with a farmer's plow or an archaeologist's trowel, but with a digital signal bouncing back from a hidden mound, revealing the outline of a plaza, the trace of a road, or perhaps the unmistakable circular silhouette of another colossal head, still waiting patiently beneath the roots of a ceiba tree. The search has moved from the surface to the subsurface and from speculation to science, yet the sense of wonder remains utterly unchanged. These stone faces have escaped the confines of academic journals and entered the bloodstream of global imagination. You can find their stoic likeness not just in museums, but in blockbuster movies and best-selling video games, often serving as a visual shorthand for ancient, forgotten power. In adventure films, they might mark the entrance to a hidden temple filled with traps. In speculative television shows, they are presented as undeniable proof of advanced ancient astronauts or lost transoceanic civilizations. Their very aesthetic, that combination of immense scale and enigmatic expression, makes them perfect vessels for our modern myths. They look simultaneously ancient and otherworldly, familiar enough to be human, yet strange enough to feel alien. This quality has made them irresistible to the world of pseudo-archaeology, where they are frequently lifted from their archaeological context and placed into grand, sensational narratives. The appeal is understandable. A mainstream historical narrative that says the Olmecs were a brilliant but local mother culture can feel, to some, less thrilling than a story of globe-trotting super-civilizations seeding knowledge across the planet. The heads, with their distinctive features, offer a tantalizing visual hook for these alternative theories, a piece of the puzzle that seems to not quite fit the established picture, at least at first glance. This phenomenon speaks less about the heads themselves and more about a deep human longing. We are drawn to mysteries that suggest a more interconnected, more wondrous past than the one in our textbooks. The idea of a lone, isolated civilization inventing everything from scratch feels improbable, so we seek connections, sometimes leaping across oceans to find them. The Olmec heads become blank screens, and we project onto them our desires for a lost golden age, for evidence that the ancient world was far more cosmopolitan than we ever dreamed. Yet, in doing so, we often overlook the true, grounded wonder right before our eyes, the real story of a people who moved mountains of stone with nothing but ingenuity and collective will, who carved a civilization from a swamp and laid the intellectual foundations for an entire cultural sphere, is arguably more impressive than any fictional interstellar intervention. The heads remind us that the human drive to create, to commemorate, and to seek meaning is itself the most powerful and enduring mystery of all. The enduring silence of these monuments faces a new and insidious enemy. For millennia, the greatest threats to the colossal heads were natural decay and the slow embrace of the jungle. Today, they confront something far more aggressive, the chemical fallout of the modern world. The heads that remain in their original outdoor settings, like those at the archaeological parks of Venta and San Lorenzo, are under constant assault. Industrial pollution and vehicle emissions release sulfur and nitrogen compounds into the atmosphere, which mix with rainwater to form acid rain. This weakly acidic precipitation falls on the ancient basalt, slowly but relentlessly eating away at the stone's crystalline structure. It dulls the sharp lines of a carved helmet strap. It softens the definition of a regal nose, and over decades, it can erase the subtle details that make each portrait unique. This is not a dramatic, sudden destruction, but a quiet, invisible erosion, a theft of history measured in microscopic particles. Beyond environmental damage, there is the ever-present risk of physical theft or vandalism. While the colossal heads are far too massive to steal, smaller Olmec artifacts, like precious jade figurines, have been looted from sites for the illegal antiquities market, severing them from the context that gives them meaning. Protecting these irreplaceable monuments has become a race against time and chemistry. In Mexico, archaeologists and conservators are engaged in a multifaceted battle to preserve this legacy. One of the most dramatic strategies has been relocation. Several of the most vulnerable heads, along with other major monuments like the massive stone altars, have been carefully moved from their original open-air sites to the safety of indoor museums. The most famous example is the Venta Park Museum in Villahermosa, where many of that site's treasures now reside in a protected, climate-controlled environment. The process of moving a 40-ton stone head is a modern echo of the Olmec's own feat, employing cranes, low loaders, and immense care. Before any move, each sculpture is meticulously documented with three-dimensional laser scanning, creating a perfect digital record of its current state. Once indoors, conservators can monitor temperature and humidity, shield the stone from direct rainfall, and apply specialized consolidants to stabilize any existing cracks or weathering. Yet, this solution creates a profound ethical dilemma. When we remove a head from the plaza where it stood for 2,500 years, we sever its physical connection to the landscape. That placement was intentional. A head facing east at Venta was part of a cosmic design, its gaze integrated with pyramids and celestial alignments. In a museum, it becomes an isolated art object, safe but disconnected. The conservation challenge, therefore, is about more than just preserving stone. It is about preserving meaning. The current approach often seeks a balance. Some heads remain in situ, protected by shelters or treated with water-repellent coatings. Others are moved to on-site museums that still feel connected to the ancient city. The goal is to allow the public to witness these wonders, to stand in their awe-inspiring presence, while ensuring they survive for future generations to study and admire. It is a reminder that our responsibility to the past is active. We are not just deciphering the Olmec story, we are also deciding which chapters, carved in vulnerable stone, will still be legible a century from now. For centuries, the narrative of the Olmecs was written by outsiders. Archaeologists, explorers, and theorists from distant places framed this civilization as a lost enigma, a puzzle for the modern world to solve. But there is another voice in this conversation, one that has been present for millennia and carries the weight of direct lineage. The Olmecs are not a vanished people disconnected from the present. They are the ancestors of many indigenous communities living in southern Mexico today. For these communities, the colossal heads and the cities they guarded are not abandoned mysteries. They are sacred landmarks, part of a living heritage that stretches in an unbroken line from the deep past into the vibrant present. This perspective fundamentally shifts the story. It moves the Olmecs from the pages of archaeology textbooks and into the realm of cultural memory, transforming ancient stones from objects of study into subjects of profound respect. The modern Mix, Zoque, and Papaluca peoples, among others, consider the Olmec heartland their ancestral homeland. Their languages, their traditions, and their very identity are woven from the same cultural fabric that began with those early city builders. When they look at a colossal head, they do not see a stranger's face. They see a grandfather, a founding elder, a reminder of where they come from. This connection is not merely symbolic. It is embedded in the landscape itself. Local place names, oral histories, and community knowledge often hold clues that have guided archaeologists to new discoveries. The stories passed down through generations may not be literal histories in the academic sense, but they are a different kind of truth, one that preserves the spiritual and emotional significance of these places. For these communities, sites like La Venta or San Lorenzo are not just archaeological zones. They are often seen as ceremonial centers still charged with power, places where the boundary between the past and the present feels thin. This living relationship creates a vital and sometimes challenging dialogue about stewardship. Who gets to tell the Olmec story? Who gets to decide how these monuments are preserved, displayed, or studied? There is a growing movement led by indigenous scholars and community leaders to ensure their voices are not just heard but are central to the process. It is about moving beyond seeing indigenous peoples as mere informants or laborers on digs, to recognizing them as intellectual partners and rightful custodians. This shift is about more than politics. It is about accuracy and depth. An indigenous perspective can ask different questions. Instead of just wondering how the heads were moved, one might ask why they were placed in that specific spot and what the landscape meant to the people who put them there. It can interpret symbols not through distant comparison, but through the continuity of myth and ritual that still echoes in local practices today. This collaborative approach enriches everyone's understanding. It reminds us that the Olmec civilization did not end. Its legacy was not buried with the last head. It flowed into the languages, the art, the agricultural knowledge, and the spiritual worldview of the people who never left. The stone faces are not lonely orphans of history. They are watched over by their descendants. This changes the very nature of the mystery. The question is no longer just who carved these giants, but how do we, as a global audience, honor the living culture that remembers them? The greatest respect we can offer these ancient kings is to listen to the voices of their heirs and to recognize that their story is not a closed book from a lost world, but a continuing chapter in a living one. The gray stoicism of the stone is a mask. To walk among the colossal heads in their prime was not an encounter with silent, monochrome giants. Digital archaeology now peels back the layers of time, offering us a glimpse into a world of startling color and sensory spectacle. Advanced three-dimensional scanning and virtual reality software allow researchers to do more than just map the heads. They can digitally restore them. Using microscopic residue analysis, scientists have detected traces of pigments on the stone surfaces, faint chemical ghosts of a once vibrant palette. The results are transformative. Imagine approaching a plaza at La Venta not to see a somber gray face, but a ruler rendered in brilliant red cinnabar, his helmet straps painted in sharp yellow ochre, and his eyes perhaps inlaid with gleaming obsidian. The stone itself was likely polished to a high sheen, catching the tropical sun and glinting like dark water. This was not a statue meant to blend into the landscape. It was a beacon of authority, designed to dominate the visual field with its chromatic power. The heads were almost certainly not solitary monuments. Virtual reconstructions place them within a dynamic ritual environment. That simple, rounded helmet on a San Lorenzo head might have been fitted with real feathers, perhaps the iridescent green plumes of the quetzal bird fluttering in the breeze. The head itself could have been adorned with necklaces of jade beads or flowers during specific ceremonies. Surrounding it in the plaza would have been other painted stelae, altars draped with textiles, and the movement of people in brightly dyed garments. The air would have been thick with the smoke of copal incense and the rhythmic sound of drums and conch shell trumpets. The stoic expression we see today was part of a living, breathing performance. The downturned mouth, when painted and gleaming, might have conveyed solemn ritual focus rather than melancholy. The watchful eyes, perhaps once highlighted with pigment, would have tracked the movements of priests and dancers enacting sacred dramas right before them. This digital resurrection shatters the museum display case. It forces us to reimagine these kings not as isolated artifacts, but as central, active participants in the sensory overload of Olmec ceremony. They were not silent, they were the focal point of the noise, the color, and the smoke, the immutable stone anchors in a swirling, temporary, and brilliantly human celebration of power and the cosmos. Color and ceremony bring us closer, but they do not erase the fundamental mysteries. For all our scanning and digging, the colossal heads guard their deepest secrets with the same stoic resolve they have maintained for millennia. The first and most personal question is the simplest: who are you? While the portrait theory is compelling, we have no names. We do not know which head represents which ruler or the dynastic lines that connected them. The variations in helmet insignia are almost certainly a form of writing, a heraldic language, but we cannot read it. Without a Rosetta Stone for Olmec glyphs, those symbols remain elegant but silent. We see individuals, but they are anonymous kings, their biographies lost to the acidic soil of the jungle. This leads directly to the second mystery: what exactly did they do during their ceremonies? We can reconstruct the sensory spectacle, but the precise ritual script is gone. Was the head itself believed to become animated with the ruler's spirit during a festival? Did priests speak to it or through it? Was its burial a form of royal funeral or the retirement of a powerful ritual object? The evidence points to all these possibilities, but the specific beliefs, the chants, the prayers, all have evaporated like morning mist over the swamps. Then there is the tantalizing physical mystery. Are there more of them still out there? 17 have been found, but the Olmec heartland is vast and largely covered in dense, difficult terrain. LIDAR surveys continue to reveal unknown structures, and local legends often speak of other stone faces glimpsed deep in the forest, only to be lost again when the vegetation reclaims the path. It is entirely probable, even likely, that another colossal head lies buried on a forgotten plaza, waiting for a shift in the riverbank or a farmer's plow to reveal its brow once more. Perhaps the greatest artistic mystery is why this form. Why did the Olmec elite choose to invest their greatest resources into these particular portraits, and not into towering statues of full-bodied figures like other ancient cultures? The focus is intensely, uniquely on the head and face. This might reflect a core philosophical belief that the head was the seat of power, the essence of identity and the soul. By isolating and enlarging it, they were magnifying the very source of a ruler's authority and his connection to the divine. Yet the why remains a matter of interpretation, not fact. These unanswered questions are not a sign of archaeological failure. They are the enduring gift of the Olmecs. A civilization that left no easy answers forces us to keep looking, to keep questioning. The mystery is what keeps the stones alive, transforming them from solved puzzles into permanent companions in wonder. Every unknown is an open door, an invitation for the next generation, armed with new tools and new perspectives, to step forward and listen a little closer to the silence. Their legacy forces us to ask a difficult question: what truly makes a civilization? For a long time, the answer was narrowly defined by a checklist inherited from the old world. A true civilization, the old story went, required certain technologies: metal tools for warfare and farming, the wheel for transportation, and draft animals to pull heavy loads. By that rigid standard, the Olmec world might have been dismissed as primitive, a society stuck in the Stone Age. Yet the colossal heads stand as 40-ton rebuttals to that outdated idea. The Olmecs achieved staggering architectural, artistic, and intellectual feats without any of those supposed prerequisites. They had no bronze or iron, yet they quarried and carved basalt harder than steel. They had no wheels, yet they moved mountains of stone across 100 miles of swamp and jungle. They had no oxen or horses, yet they organized labor on a scale that reshaped their entire landscape. Their genius was not in copying a template, but in innovating with what they had. They looked at their world of rivers, vines, and human strength, and they saw a different kind of engine. Their civilization was not a weaker version of something else. It was a powerful, original creation, a testament to the fact that human progress does not follow a single, mandatory path. It blossoms in countless forms, shaped by environment, belief, and sheer collective will. The Olmecs teach us that civilization is not a checklist of gadgets. It is a set of capabilities, the ability to coordinate large groups of people toward a common goal, the capacity to develop complex symbolic systems for art and timekeeping, and the vision to create lasting monuments to shared ideals. They measured their advancement not in horsepower, but in social harmony, astronomical precision, and artistic mastery. Their story dismantles the arrogant notion that sophistication flows only from one cultural source. Instead, it reveals a world where brilliance emerged independently in the humid lowlands of Mexico, on the banks of the Indus River, in the valleys of Peru, and along the Yellow River, each following its own unique logic. When we look at those solemn stone faces, we are not looking at a failed attempt to be like someone else. We are looking at the confident signature of a people who invented their own way to be great. Their greatest lesson might be the simplest. Human potential is universal, but its expression is wonderfully, brilliantly diverse. The stone faces have watched empires rise and fall in silence. Our journey began with a mystery staring from the jungle, and we have slowly pieced together the world behind that gaze. We now know where the stone came from, the mountains of the Tuxtlas. We understand the likely how, a symphony of human labor, ropes, and rafts moving 40-ton blocks across impossible distances. We have met the who, the powerful Olmec rulers whose individual portraits these almost certainly are, and we have traced the intellectual legacy they left for every culture that followed. Yet with all these answers, the deepest why retains its magic. Why choose this form, this immense, isolated head to represent a king? Why invest generations of effort into a monument destined to be buried? The answers we have are logical, but they do not diminish the wonder. They simply frame it within the grand, recurring story of humanity. These heads are ultimate symbols of ambition, the drive to carve order from chaos and to shout into the future, "We were here." They are also profound reminders of fragility. The very society that could command such effort was vulnerable to shifting rivers, volcanic ash, and the slow unraveling of its own social contract. The heads outlived their creators, their cities, and their very names, becoming less about the individuals they depicted and more about the timeless human condition they represent, our longing for permanence in an impermanent world. So the next time you encounter a puzzle from the past, a fragment that does not seem to fit, look closer. Do not just ask what it is. Ask what it meant to the people who made it, what it cost them, and what dream they were trying to etch into eternity. The true treasure is not in solving the mystery completely, but in the calm, patient unraveling of the story itself. If you enjoyed this journey into the Olmec world, subscribe for more explorations where we quietly untangle the greatest puzzles of the ancient past, one thread at a time.